Imagine being told that your child is safe, only to later discover the unimaginable truth. She was locked in a dumpster during a fire drill, left all alone, while everyone else was evacuated. How could something so horrific happen at a place where children are supposed to be protected? This is the reality I faced when my disabled daughter, who requires constant care, was ignored and forgotten by the very people entrusted with her safety. The school's failure to follow basic protocols resulted in a horrifying and dangerous situation that could have easily been avoided. And what's worse, no one checked on her. No one even thought to ask where she was. As the minutes ticked by, my heart sank with the unbearable thought of what could have happened to her. It's a feeling no parent should ever have to endure. In this video, I'll take you through the shocking series of events that led to this unimaginable neglect and reveal the deep flaws within a system that was supposed to protect my daughter. What happens when the system fails you? What happens when the people you trust let you down? Stay with me as I uncover the truth behind this heart-wrenching incident and the long-lasting impact it has had on my family. It was an ordinary morning. The sun was shining, and the school was bustling with the usual hum of students getting ready for another day. My daughter, Emily, a bright and energetic 8-year-old with cerebral palsy, had just been dropped off by her father. She had a special routine that I made sure was followed each day. Every detail mattered. Emily has mobility challenges, which means she requires assistance with almost everything: walking, eating, and even going to the restroom. She's independent in her own way, but she needs someone to be there every step of the way, making sure she's safe and comfortable. As we walked through the school gates, Emily smiled up at me. She loved her school. The teachers were kind, and her classmates were always eager to help her. But that morning, I had a strange feeling I couldn't shake. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. It was supposed to be like any other day. The school itself was a large, sprawling building, 3 floors of classrooms, a playground, and plenty of open space. The staff was generally friendly, and I trusted them to take good care of Emily. The security measures seemed solid on the surface. There were emergency drills held regularly, and the school had an updated fire safety system. They had procedures in place for evacuations, and I had been reassured multiple times that the staff knew how to handle situations involving students with disabilities, but the cracks in the system, the small, overlooked details, were already there, hidden beneath the surface. While the school touted its safety procedures, there was something off about the way things were managed. A few weeks before this incident, I had noticed that during fire drills, some teachers were distracted and didn't always seem to account for every student. It was easy to dismiss at the time, but now I see that those small lapses were warning signs I should have paid more attention to. The fire drill started just as it always did. An announcement, the loud siren, and everyone scrambling to get outside in an orderly fashion. The hallways were filled with the sound of shuffling feet and chatter as students hurried out to the designated evacuation points. Emily, being in a wheelchair, required extra time to exit the building, but her assigned aide was always there to help her. At least, that's what I had believed. But that day, something went wrong. Emily's aide had been distracted by another student in need, and in the chaos of the drill, she was left behind. She wasn't part of the first wave of students to leave the building. No one noticed. No one asked where she was. The teachers who were supposed to oversee the evacuation assumed everyone had made it out, including my daughter. The usual procedure was to double-check that all students had safely exited, but somehow that didn't happen. The door was left unlocked, the hallway empty, and my daughter was left behind, not even thought about as the fire drill came to an end. No one checked the dumpsters. No one thought to ask if every student had been accounted for. In the midst of ensuring the rest of the school was evacuated, the small, crucial detail of Emily's whereabouts was overlooked, and no one had the foresight to wonder about the children who might need extra attention. While the fire drill was deemed a success by the staff, my daughter's safety had been compromised, and no one knew. As the minutes passed, my daughter, left in that dimly lit dumpster area, began to realize that something was wrong. The sounds of the drill had faded, and she was alone. Cold, disoriented. She could hear muffled voices in the distance, but no one was coming for her. No one was even looking. The fire drill had started like any other, a scheduled routine that all the students were used to. The loud siren rang through the school, followed by an announcement over the PA system. Attention all students and staff, this is a fire drill. Please proceed to your designated evacuation areas immediately. It was a sound that everyone was familiar with, one that signified a moment of calm within the structured chaos of a school day. For most, it was just another drill, an exercise that would end with everyone returning to class within a few minutes. But for my daughter, Emily, this was no ordinary drill. I had always been cautious about fire drills, especially since Emily needed extra time and care to move around. Her wheelchair, while essential for her mobility, slowed her down during an evacuation. I had discussed her specific needs with her teachers multiple times, how she needed more time, how her aide was supposed to stay with her, making sure she was safely escorted out of the building. The last thing I wanted was for her to be overlooked. But that morning, in the rush of the drill, I couldn't have known that my worst fears would come true. As the announcement echoed through the halls, I imagined Emily making her way down the familiar corridors with the help of her aide, Miss Taylor. Emily had been excited that morning, her usual bubbly self, asking about what we were having for dinner later that evening. I kissed her goodbye, knowing that the drill would be over before she even had time to be anxious about it. I had no idea that my daughter was in more danger than anyone could have predicted. Meanwhile, inside the school, the halls were filled with a mixture of sounds: the hurried footsteps of students, the clatter of chairs being pushed aside, the voices of teachers instructing their classes to line up in an orderly fashion. The urgency of the moment was palpable, but amidst the chaos, there was something more alarming at play: a lack of attention to the very children who needed the most care. As students streamed out of classrooms, teachers led their groups down stairwells and out the doors. But some teachers were distracted, more focused on ushering the students out rather than ensuring that every child had been accounted for. It was supposed to be a routine drill, easy, simple, and quick, but as the crowd thickened, so did the confusion. I couldn't have known that Miss Taylor, Emily's aide, was caught in the middle of this confusion. Emily was supposed to be escorted directly to the playground with her group, but when Miss Taylor noticed another student struggling to keep up with the others, she momentarily lost sight of Emily. This was a routine that had been practiced countless times before, and Miss Taylor had been reliable, so it didn't cross anyone's mind that something could go wrong. But this time it did. As Miss Taylor helped the other student, Emily was left behind. The teachers in charge of the other groups had assumed that all their students were accounted for, and were already outside. There was no head count. No one checked. No one asked. It was as if Emily had simply vanished. A few minutes after the drill started, the last bell rang, signaling that all students had successfully evacuated. The teachers began filing out, marking the drill as a success, unaware that the biggest mistake of the day had already occurred. Back in the classroom, the other students were already talking about what they would have for lunch, laughing and joking, oblivious to the fact that Emily was still inside the building. The noise, the laughter, the chatter, it all made it easier for the teachers to assume that everything was fine. Their job, as they saw it, was done. They were responsible for their own groups, and that was it. But in their rush to complete the drill, they failed to do one crucial thing: ensure every child was safely outside. As the teachers gathered in the designated assembly area outside, I waited by the gate, scanning the crowd for Emily. I thought I saw her wheelchair among the other students, but as the seconds turned into minutes, the gnawing feeling in my stomach grew. Something wasn't right. Why hadn't Emily come out yet? Why wasn't she with the others? My heart started to race, but I tried to stay calm, telling myself that maybe she was just caught up in the crowd. After all, it wasn't unusual for the students with mobility issues to take a little longer to get outside. But as the minutes passed, that voice inside me grew louder. Something was wrong. I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. I hurried to the teacher in charge and asked if Emily had been accounted for. She looked at me with confusion. "She's probably with her group," she said, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She hadn't even bothered to check. The minutes continued to drag on. The other children were laughing and playing, enjoying the fresh air, but my focus was elsewhere. I walked quickly to the school's main doors, my anxiety building with every step. "Excuse me," I asked, now frantic, "have you seen my daughter?" The staff members who had remained outside seemed more concerned with filling out paperwork than with answering my questions. They all assured me she would be fine. But Emily wasn't fine. I didn't wait any longer. I ran inside the building, my heart pounding in my chest. As I passed through the hallways, I called out her name. There was no answer. The school was eerily quiet, save for the faint echo of distant voices. My mind raced. I knew I had to check the places she might have been, but I had no idea where she could be. I searched the classrooms, the hallways, the bathrooms. Nothing. My stomach twisted into knots. I knew, deep down, something terrible had happened. Finally, I reached the back of the building, the area where the dumpsters were kept. The sound of the wind against the empty structures was deafening, but it felt like everything else had gone silent. I saw it then, the dumpster in the far corner. The lid was slightly ajar as if something or someone had been there. My breath caught in my throat as I rushed over. I lifted the lid with trembling hands, and there in the shadows, I saw her, Emily. She was terrified, her eyes wide with fear as she looked up at me. She had been trapped in that dumpster for who knows how long, and no one had even bothered to check. The helplessness I felt in that moment is something I'll never forget. I had trusted the system, trusted the people in charge to take care of her, and they had failed. The fear in Emily's eyes mirrored my own. It was as if the entire world had stopped, and I was standing in the middle of it, powerless to change what had just happened. Every minute that passed had felt like an eternity, each second built on the last, escalating my anxiety. And now, the realization hit me all at once. My daughter could have been seriously hurt, all because no one cared enough to double check. As I lifted the lid of the dumpster, the world seemed to freeze. Every sound, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind, the faint hum of distant voices, faded into the background, leaving only the horrifying silence that enveloped me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat sending a wave of cold dread through my body. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I reached down, the jagged edges of the metal against my fingers reminding me of how far I had gone into the unknown. What I was about to see would change everything. And then I saw her. Emily was curled up in the corner of the dumpster, her small body huddled for warmth against the cold metal. Her wheelchair was knocked sideways, its wheels still spinning weakly from the jolt that had sent her there. Her face was pale, her wide eyes full of confusion and fear. I could see her body trembling, not just from the cold, but from the sheer terror of being alone in the dark, trapped in a place where no one would think to look for her. My breath caught in my throat. My first instinct was to reach for her, to pull her into my arms and shield her from the world. But I hesitated. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed, consumed by the overwhelming flood of emotions that had just surged through me. Anger, fear, disbelief, a crushing realization that my daughter had been abandoned, forgotten, and left in a place where no one should have been. The smell of the dumpster hit me, stale, cold, and faintly metallic. It clung to my clothes and filled my nose, but it was nothing compared to the overwhelming sense of helplessness that threatened to consume me. How had this happened? How could this have been allowed to happen? I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at the school, at the teachers, at anyone who might have been involved. How could they have just left her? How could they have allowed this to happen when they knew what Emily needed? But there was no time for screaming, no time for questions. I needed to get to her. I needed to make sure she was okay. I knelt down beside her, my hands shaking as I reached out to touch her arm. Her skin was cold to the touch, and I could feel the tremors in her body as she looked up at me, her eyes wide and full of unspoken fear. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was as if she wasn't sure if I was real or if this was some nightmare she was trapped in. The moment those words left her mouth, something inside me broke. A sob rose in my throat, choking me as I pulled her into my arms. She was light, fragile, and I could feel every inch of her trembling against me. It was a feeling I never wanted to experience. The sense of utter helplessness, the feeling that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't protect her from this kind of harm. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But instead, all I could do was hold her, my heart breaking as I realized the depth of the trauma she had just endured. She had been left in a place where no child should ever be. Forgotten, alone, trapped in a dark corner with no one to help her. And as I looked at her, my own fears began to take root. I couldn't help but think, what if I had been too late? What if I hadn't found her in time? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, raw, fierce, and uncontrollable. It wasn't just the school's failure to care for my daughter. It wasn't just that no one had bothered to check on her. It was the complete disregard for her humanity, for the fact that she was a child, a vulnerable, disabled child who depended on others for care. It was as if her life didn't matter, as if she were just another name on a roster, another student to be pushed aside. But what hit me the hardest was the realization that I had trusted these people. I had trusted the system. I had believed that as a parent I could send my daughter to school every day and know she would be safe. I had thought that the teachers, the staff, and the administrators were there to protect her. But in that moment, I realized that trust was a lie. The tears started to fall then, unbidden, as I held Emily close. She was crying too, her small body racked with sobs as she clung to me, the fear of what had happened still fresh in her mind. My heart ached for her. I could feel her fear, her confusion, her sadness. And I couldn't help but wonder how long she had been there, how many minutes, or worse, how many hours she had been alone in that dumpster. No one had come to check on her. No one had thought to ask, "Where is Emily?" She had been forgotten, abandoned. I couldn't bear the thought of what could have happened to her. What if no one had found her? What if the situation had been more severe? My mind raced with every worst-case scenario I could imagine. The fear of losing her, of not being able to protect her, consumed me. And then came the guilt. I had trusted them. I had believed in their assurances that my daughter would be safe. I had placed her in their care, and they had failed her. Every question, every doubt that had lingered in the back of my mind now flooded forward, tearing at me. Why didn't I see the warning signs? Why didn't I push harder for more checks and balances? Why didn't I trust my instincts? It was as if I had failed her too. The weight of that thought pressed down on me, suffocating me, and I couldn't stop the tears from falling. Emily clung to me tighter, her small arms wrapped around my neck as she whispered, "I'm scared, Mom. I thought I was going to be stuck forever." Those words, "stuck forever," hit me like a punch to the gut. That was the reality she had faced. She had been trapped, isolated, abandoned, with no one to help her, no one to hear her cries. And all because a simple safety protocol, a simple check had been ignored. I pulled her closer, holding her tighter, as if somehow my embrace could shield her from the horror of what had just happened. But it couldn't. It couldn't undo the damage, the fear, the trauma she had just endured. No matter how hard I tried to shield her, nothing could erase the memory of those few dark hours of abandonment. The trust had been shattered. The foundation of security and safety had crumbled. The emotional turmoil I felt was overwhelming. It wasn't just anger anymore. It wasn't just disbelief. It was the crushing weight of knowing that this was my daughter's reality now. She would carry the memory of this day for the rest of her life. The fear, the confusion, the abandonment, these were scars that would take time to heal, if they ever healed at all. And as I held her there in that cold, dark dumpster, my mind raced with questions. What now? What do I do with the knowledge that my child had been abandoned in such a horrific way? How do I move forward from this? How do I make sure this never happens to anyone else? How do I ensure that the people who were responsible for this pay for their negligence? The emotional peak was not just the discovery of Emily in the dumpster. It was the moment when I realized the full extent of the failure of the system, of the people I trusted, and of myself for not doing more. It was the realization that this was not just an isolated incident. This was part of a larger, systemic issue, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my daughter's broken trust and the shattered pieces of my own. As I carried Emily out of that dumpster, I knew that this wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a long, painful journey to hold those responsible accountable, to heal my daughter's trauma, and to ensure that no one else had to suffer what she had. But as I looked at her, her tear-streaked face now relaxing into the comfort of my arms, I knew that the fight was worth it. For her, for all the children who had been forgotten, I would make sure that their voices were heard. In the immediate aftermath of that fateful day, I was consumed by a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. As I held Emily close, trying to reassure her that everything would be okay, my mind raced with one thought. How could this happen? The anger I had been suppressing began to build up, fueled by the overwhelming realization that the people who were supposed to protect my daughter had failed her in the most basic way imaginable. The first step I took was to get Emily checked by a medical professional. Despite her obvious distress, she seemed physically unharmed. But I knew better than to assume there were no lingering effects. Mental and emotional scars often take longer to reveal themselves than physical ones. I took her to a doctor who performed a thorough examination. Fortunately, she was unharmed physically, but the emotional toll of what she had experienced was far more difficult to assess. After the doctor's visit, the real work began. I knew I had to take action, not just for Emily, but for the sake of all the other children at that school. This kind of neglect could not go unchallenged, and I knew that if I didn't speak up, the same thing could happen to another child. My first step was to contact the school principal. When I reached out to the school, my expectations were low. I knew I was dealing with a system that had already failed us once, and I wasn't sure how they would respond. I made my intentions clear from the start. I demanded an investigation into what had happened, an apology, and immediate changes to their safety protocols to ensure nothing like this could ever happen again. At first, the school's response was what I had feared. The principal seemed genuinely shocked, but there was an underlying tone of defensiveness in his voice. It was as if he was more concerned with protecting the institution than addressing the gravity of the situation. The school district, when they became involved, responded similarly. They promised an investigation, but it was clear to me that the urgency I felt was not shared by the administrators. In the days following, I pressed for accountability. I sent multiple emails, made phone calls, and even scheduled in-person meetings. At each step, I was met with empty promises. They assured me that they were reviewing their procedures and that a report would be generated soon. But what was missing from these responses was any acknowledgement of the trauma Emily had endured or any genuine willingness to ensure such an incident would never occur again. The investigation was, as I had feared, a mere formality. The school sent out a series of emails that explained their procedures and how they would improve the system, but no one took real responsibility for the mistakes that had been made. The aide, Miss Taylor, was never disciplined. In fact, she was allowed to continue working with the students without any repercussions, despite her failure to ensure Emily's safety during the drill. The teachers who failed to conduct proper head counts were not held accountable either. The entire system seemed to be built on the idea that mistakes could be made without consequence. This lack of accountability was the hardest part for me to accept. How could the school not recognize the severity of what had happened? How could they let this slide without taking real action? It became clear that the institution's primary concern was preserving its own image rather than addressing the trauma and negligence that had affected my daughter. As the days passed, the emotional impact of the incident on my family became increasingly evident. Emily, who had once been so outgoing and full of energy, became withdrawn. She would often wake up in the middle of the night, crying out in fear. The once joyful school mornings became a struggle. She didn't want to go to school anymore, and the thought of being left alone in a place that had failed her was too much for her to bear. She was scared, not just of the school itself, but of being abandoned again. Her anxiety levels skyrocketed, and she began to display behaviors that had never been an issue before, like refusing to speak to anyone except me and clinging to me at all times. As a parent, it was heartbreaking to watch. I had spent so much of her life teaching her to be independent and strong, but this event had completely shattered her sense of security. The mental and emotional toll was devastating for both of us. While I tried to be the rock she needed, I too was struggling with feelings of betrayal and inadequacy. The weight of knowing that I had trusted a system that had failed us was unbearable. I found myself questioning every decision I had ever made regarding Emily's care. Had I been too trusting? Had I failed her by not ensuring better safety measures were in place? But the effects of the incident weren't just emotional. The psychological toll it took on me became clear in the months that followed. I began experiencing anxiety and sleepless nights, replaying the events over and over in my mind. I started to doubt my own judgment and questioned if there was more I could have done to prevent this from happening. The sense of powerlessness I felt as I watched my daughter struggle was something I couldn't shake off. Eventually, I realized that I couldn't keep replaying that day in my mind. I couldn't keep carrying the weight of this trauma alone. Emily and I both needed to heal, but that healing process would require more than just time, it would require action. I knew that I had to do everything in my power to ensure that Emily's voice was heard, that the school took responsibility for what had happened, and that steps were taken to make sure no other child would ever have to endure what she did. I began to look for legal support. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in educational negligence cases, hoping to hold the school accountable for their actions. While the legal route was exhausting and at times felt like an uphill battle, it became clear that taking a stand was the only way forward. My lawyer helped me gather evidence and file complaints with the school board, pushing for changes to be made to the school's emergency procedures. I also reached out to local media, hoping to bring more attention to the issue. I wanted the community to know what had happened, and I wanted the school to feel the pressure of public scrutiny. The more people knew about the situation, the harder it would be for the school to dismiss it. Meanwhile, I continued to work with Emily, helping her rebuild her confidence and overcome the trauma she had experienced. We enrolled her in therapy to help her process the emotions she was struggling with. It wasn't easy and there were setbacks, but slowly we started to see small improvements. She began to trust again, to engage with her classmates, and to feel a sense of safety in school again. But there was always that underlying fear, that feeling of vulnerability that had been etched into her psyche. The damage had been done. The long-term effects of this incident were far-reaching. Not only did it affect Emily's mental health and emotional well-being, but it also had a profound impact on our entire family. We became hyper-aware of the dangers that could exist in the system, constantly questioning whether our children were safe in the places where we had trusted them to be. We began to recognize the flaws in institutions that we had once thought were reliable, and we understood how easily those systems could fail the very people they were meant to protect. In reflecting on the lessons learned, I came to realize that this experience changed me in ways I had never imagined. It taught me the importance of advocating for my child, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it may be. It reminded me that the systems we trust can often fail us, and it's our responsibility to ensure that they are held accountable. Most importantly, it taught me the importance of never being complacent. We cannot assume that others will do the right thing. We must be vigilant, active participants in our children's safety and well-being. For others who may be watching this or who may find themselves in similar situations, my advice is simple: never assume that someone else is taking care of your child. Follow up. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to push for the changes that are needed. If something doesn't seem right, speak up. Be the advocate your child needs, even when it's hard, even when it feels like you're fighting an uphill battle. But I also want to say this. Don't let the fear of conflict stop you. Standing up for your child is not easy, and it can be terrifying. But in the end, the only way to ensure that changes are made is to hold people accountable. The more we stand together, the more we can make sure that our children are safe and that their voices are heard. As for Emily and me, we have moved forward, but the scars remain. The school has made some minor changes to their procedures, but I still feel that they have not fully acknowledged the magnitude of the mistake that was made. I don't know if we will ever truly get the justice we deserve, but I will continue to fight for Emily's future and for the future of all children who rely on institutions to keep them safe. In the end, this story is not just about one child's experience, it is about all of us. It is a reminder that the systems we place our trust in are not infallible and that we must remain vigilant to ensure they do not fail. The pain of that day will never fully go away, but I have learned that change can come even in the darkest of times. The journey is not over. It is only just beginning. As I reflect on everything that has happened, I can't help but feel the weight of what we've been through. Emily's story is not just one of abandonment, it's a reflection of a system that failed to protect our most vulnerable and the painful reality of how easily children can be forgotten when their needs aren't immediately visible. The system is supposed to be there to serve and protect, but what happens when it doesn't? What happens when the people we trust to care for our children fail us in the most fundamental way? I've told Emily's story, but what about the other children? How many times has this happened at other schools, at other institutions, to other parents who were too afraid to speak out? How many children have suffered in silence, forgotten and left behind during drills, or even worse, in real emergencies? The thought that this could happen to anyone else is terrifying. I can't be the only one asking these questions. We all have a responsibility to make sure that our children are safe, and not just from the obvious dangers, but from the hidden ones that often go unnoticed, the indifference, the negligence, the lack of accountability. The truth is, this story is far from over. What happened to Emily is just the tip of the iceberg. As I continue to press for answers, there's something else I'm realizing. If this can happen in a school that is supposed to be a sanctuary for our children, what does that say about the systems we trust to protect them in other areas of life? If schools can fail this badly, what other parts of our society are equally vulnerable? Are we prepared to face the truth about how poorly we treat those who need our care the most? And yet, in the midst of all this, there is a silver lining. By sharing this story, by speaking out, we can start to make a difference. We can hold those in charge accountable. But we must act. We cannot sit back and wait for someone else to fix it. We must be the change, and that change begins with each of us deciding to take a stand, to raise our voices, and to make sure that our children's safety is no longer an afterthought. I know the road ahead is not easy. I know that the fight for accountability, the fight for justice, is long and difficult. But I also know that by speaking out, by holding those responsible for Emily's trauma accountable, we can help make sure this never happens again. But I can't do this alone. I need your help. We need your help. If you are a parent, if you are a teacher, if you are anyone who has ever trusted an institution with the safety and well-being of a child, then this is your fight too. We can't let this happen to another child. We can't stand by and let systems like the one that failed Emily continue to operate unchecked. Together, we have the power to make a real change. Together, we can make schools safer for everyone. I'm asking you to join me in this fight. Share this video, share Emily's story, and make sure it reaches as many people as possible. I need your voices. I need your support. Whether you have a child in school or not, whether you have ever experienced something like this firsthand, this is about all of us. This is about creating a world where children are never left behind, where no one is forgotten, where safety, accountability, and care are always the priority. If this story has resonated with you in any way, if it has sparked something inside you, then I encourage you to take action. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If you have ever faced a similar situation, if you know someone who has, or if you believe that the systems we rely on to protect our children need to be overhauled, speak up. Together, we can create a groundswell of change that can't be ignored. And if you want to follow Emily's journey, if you want to stay updated on what happens next, if you want to be part of a community that stands for justice, for change, and for a future where our children are safe, I urge you to subscribe to my channel HOA Denied Access. We will continue to share our story, but more importantly, we will continue to fight. We will continue to push for accountability. We will continue to raise our voices until every school, every institution, understands that the safety and well-being of our children is non-negotiable. Because it's not just about one child, it's about all of them. It's about making sure that every child who goes to school, every child who is left in the care of others, is treated with the respect, the attention, and the care they deserve. No more excuses, no more negligence. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can ensure that what happened to Emily, what happened to us, never happens again. But we need your help. It's time to stand up. It's time to fight for our children. Don't let this be just another forgotten story. Don't let this be another case of negligence swept under the rug. Share this video, join the conversation, and together, let's make a lasting impact. We can't let this happen to another child. Let's make sure no one is ever left behind again. Join us. Thank you for your support. Together, we will make a change.